Hi everyone, I'm Jeff Peterson, CEO of Blue Monarch Management, and I want to welcome you to this session in our digital transformation series. At Blue Monarch, we work with organizations to modernize how decisions get made, how work flows, and how teams deliver with systems that reduce friction, strengthen accountability, and unlock growth. And in nearly every engagement, one thing keeps showing up. It's the silent drag caused by manual workflows. Broken processes don't always scream for attention, but they erode trust. They slow down decision making and waste time at every level, and we see this over and over again with clients we work with. That's why today we're focusing on workflow automation, not as a tech upgrade, but as a strategic lever. When it's done right, automation delivers 5 core benefits that show up across almost every business model. Number 1, speed. Work moves faster. Approvals, requests, updates, they just seem to happen without the manual follow-up. 2, consistency. There are fewer mistakes, less ambiguity, and tighter execution. 3, cost control. Teams stop wasting time on repetitive admin and rework. 4, visibility. Leaders get a clearer picture of what's happening and what's stuck. And 5, and a personal favorite these days with so many trends around new company growth, startups, and the impetus to compete differently and better in the world markets, is scalability. And the system doesn't break as the business grows. It bends, it flexes without losing any of the integrity. And so I'm quite excited as we continue with our digital transformation series to welcome Riley Bauer from Bauer Automate, who spent years helping organizations to simplify and scale through practical high-impact automation. Bauer Automate focuses on Microsoft enterprise tools primarily and systems. And while we'll touch on some of that today, it's really the philosophy of automation that we're exploring today with him. When a client drives an initiative that engages our organization for help, we always look at 4 different streams of benefits. We look for financial benefits, we look for transformational benefits, we look for positioning benefits, so strategic positioning in the marketplace, and we look for capacity building benefits. Riley and his team have proven that they can deliver results from all 4 of those benefit streams really smartly and, quite frankly, really quickly. We're going to explore what makes workflow automation stick, where it breaks down, and how to build systems that don't just run, but they run better as you grow. So let's get into it. Welcome, Riley.
Thanks, Jeff. I'm really excited to be here.
Why don't you give us a little bit of a frame for who Bauer Automate is, what you do, and sort of why you launched your organization?
Yeah, that sounds good. As far as Bauer Automate is concerned, it's a pun on Microsoft's Power Automate and my name. It's one of the most common workflow engines out there, and we find that we're just seeing that we're helping organizations use the tools that they already have. So 74% of organizations have either Google or Microsoft Workspace, and we just built a business around supporting, helping use the tools that they already have to do low-hanging fruit, simple automations. One of my favorite examples is something like a time-off request. Everybody understands the process, but many organizations are still sending it through an email or even a paper that's getting walked across the building. And so we just started looking at opportunities to automate using the tools that a company already has for simple things like digital forms and places where we'd have like a notification or an approval. And we're starting to see trends with AI as well, but our main focus is definitely on the simpler automation.
A good foundation from which to grow. So what are you seeing? I'd say maybe let's anchor on the concept of friction for the moment. So when you go into a client, what are you seeing when you first hit the ground with a client around friction points and some of their headwinds or challenges that they experience before you get started?
So, I mean, there's the big buzzword right now is AI, and I've been finding that a lot of people, when they hear automation and AI, are worried it might be coming after their jobs. And for us, it's not about replacing jobs. It's about unlocking value and finding other places where the team can do more valuable work. You've got some great people on your team, and what we're finding is even some of the most passionate ones are mostly just scared of the unknown. And I think that's where being a partner and a collaborator working together on these kind of engagements is where we shine a little bit stronger. So we come in and we identify some of these people who are either stronger in tech savvy or are concerned about the change as well, and try to make sure they get the special treatment. They're involved in the project and that they can help be part of what we produce, so that they also understand our goals.
I think one of the key reasons why we're here as part of digital transformation is automation is huge these days. A minute ago, you touched on a couple of trends. Maybe can you elaborate a little bit more about sort of what's hot right now around the concept of workflow automation?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest thing that we see right now in our world is the document automation between what these large language models can do for summarizing documents, what we can do with AI to do character recognition to turn a scanned document full of messy doctor's handwriting into searchable text, and how to make that information easier to find through the organization because it's tagged, it's searchable. We're also seeing some other trends here with just like general workflow automation. Looking at a company like Uber, in the last couple of years, they've managed to build 40,000 workflows in Power Automate that support about 80 large organizational processes, and starting to see some really big unlocked value there. They think they're looking at about $9 million a year just on those processes.
Since we've been getting to know each other again after a first project that we worked several years ago, I keep coming back to one of the most interesting parts of what Bauer Automate does, which is sort of bridge that very simple workflows between humans and documents or humans and approvals, and how does it actually drive to the bottom line. So can you just give a little bit of a scaffolding around that? You know, when you go in and you fix a workflow, or you look at a company like Uber fixes 8 or 9 of them, to be able to drive those kinds of savings, how does that actually happen inside of an organization?
Well, we try to understand the fact that, many of these processes are quite time consuming. Submitting a simple paper form, getting it through to your manager, and having the 2 or 3 people who need to follow up on it afterwards see it in a timely manner it's a very common problem that I don't think organizations realize how prevalent it is in their operations. And so it's, in my opinion, in the top level of an organization, it's where you're looking at where you can save in this economy. It's death by 1,000 cuts. And if we have 1,000 paper forms that each take a couple minutes, but that scales up through the organization, each process, when you request the project, you have a form to fill out. When you request your time off, when you go and fill out something for a customer deliverable, there is all these forms and paperwork that gets filed away in a hard to find spot. People are looking for it. There's no notifications. There's no awareness about it. And so we're finding that every organization has a large amount of opportunity for workflow automation on a lot of these simple processes. And then there's also places where we can unlock value in some extremely complex processes as well. An example we'd recently worked on here was with a municipality. We built a system for their disability transit. And most of the people who need to use the system have to fill out something through paper and fax it in just because of the nature of the audience. They need some help with the paperwork. So we still have an AI that's going and reading the forms that are sent in through the fax machine, transcribing it into the database automatically, and then there's a whole bunch of that process where they would originally have to take a paper on the bus to 5 or 6 different doctors is all in some central portal now. And so it's really cool to kind of see that there's some small, simple, low-hanging fruits to an entire operations of a department.
Nice example. As you were queuing that one up, you used 2 terms that were sort of opposite sides of the same coin. One was problem and the other was opportunity. Maybe with that, when you go in and work with a client, even scoping a project with a client, what do you tend to focus on? Do you focus on that return on investment, and a small investment in the work that you do can drive substantial benefits be along the 4 streams that we talked about before? Or do you frame it more as a problem? In which case, what are some of those hidden costs of annual work inside an organization? How do you approach that kind of a conversation?
I think it's both, and it's important to understand mostly the stakeholders that you're working with on what resonates more, because some people are frustrated with the way that they're doing their work and they want it to change, and other people are we're looking at ways to change the way the organization is doing business. Maybe we want to reduce some costs. Maybe we want to reallocate the value so we can get somebody doing something that's more important for our business. So I definitely see that like the decisions are, when we look at like financial impact, that's pretty big. The strategic impact, maybe we want to do something better than our competitors. We want to be faster. We want to have a more consistent process. Then we go on the strategic side of things. And then there's, I think, a lot of other downstream impacts we're seeing to these workflows as well. But I definitely think when we're meeting with our main stakeholders, we're looking at the financial and the strategic benefits the most and looking at where we're trying to kind of fix their problem statement. And then when we're actually meeting with the people who are going to use or benefit from our workflow, we're more focused on the solution. How does it work? How does it function to save them time? And so I do find it's kind of a matter of understanding what they need to hear and who you're working with so that we are getting the right message across at different levels of the organization.
It's probably a good segue into to a discussion about some diagnostics and how do you get started with something like this. My experience, I'd say our firm's experience, when we start off with process-heavy projects where an organization is looking to get into process optimization or improve performance, we often see, not always, depends on the nature of the organization, but we often see some level of disconnect between the senior executives in an organization who have often pushed the annual granular process work down to the front lines or the outer limits of the organization. Completely understandable given some of the complexities that they need to manage from the C-suite. But as you rightly pointed out, in a different way, a small process amplified over millions of repetitions can really add up to the bottom line. So when you get into a new project like this, how do you diagnose where to start? And then how do you communicate that with the people to be able to mobilize support for the work that you do?
Well, taking advantage of my expertise and experience for a moment, kind of have a hunch on some of those processes just with our nature being management consultants. But, I don't want to come in and just be immediately prescriptive. It's important to be a collaborative consultant and to kind of listen to those concerns and understand where the main pain points are. I think it can then leverage some of our experience and the workflows that we've built already to understand which ones might provide more value, be a quicker win, get our foot in the door to help them understand the work that we do. I go back to the time off request process again, but it's one of my best examples of an extremely common business problem that we see. And in one of our organizations, they have about 50 employees. Power Automate actually has a meter in it now, so we can set it up and say that each workflow run would save approximately half an hour at $30 an hour. And now it's reporting back that they're trending to save about $1,000 a month in their single process here of just a time off request that was traditionally written on a piece of paper, walked up the stairs, signed off by a manager, and then written on a whiteboard. Reasonably, that's a half-hour process. And I think looking at how that scales more, we have another customer who has really heavily documented the estimated time savings for all of their projects. And over the last 3 years, we've been able to unlock almost $2 million in extra value. 127% of the money they've given us, we've been able to give the organization back because we've kind of looked at all these little workflows that they've been doing for these simple forms and have identified a lot of opportunity for where that just, saves a little bit of time. And then when we start bringing in some data like that, we can start getting more buy-in through the organization. But finalizing up here on that time off request, it's a process everybody in the organization will eventually touch. And so it's a great one to start getting the gears turning for all levels of the organization to have some ideas for how, this was an improvement. Now I can also improve my truck inspections. I can improve this other paperwork I fill out.
So I love that. So I'm going to poke a little bit more at this, at a couple of the drivers of return on investment on this, because I got to believe that on one level, it's nice to be able to say, a paper-based exercise of whole reduction in manual steps on a time off process, for example, translates into X number of dollars. We certainly get into this space, but I'm curious about sort of what you would do next with that information, right? How do you actually help the organization realize the change in dollars? Is it a cost savings? Is it headcount reductions? Is it, maybe just sort of walk through you've got the so what, but what's the what next part?
I think as we go through and workshop some of those problems, not all of them are ripe or suited for automation. I don't think AI is taking everybody's job anytime soon. It's really powerful. It's really cool, but it's still just a super fancy spell check. And I think at this point here, we're looking at identifying some of those problems that end up on our board and reallocating the people who previously didn't have the capacity to work on those problems. And so I think for us, it's mostly just looking at, yeah, how can we be more strategic about the organization's overall goals? Some of them are going to be well suited for automation, and some of them are well suited for that capacity we freed up because of the automation.
Okay. B, let's take that even just a little bit further. What's the value of speed or time when you're looking at automation in this?
I'm going to speak to a personal example that just happened this morning. We took a few weeks longer than we should have to get a quote out the door, and we were informed that another vendor's been selected on an opportunity here. And I think that speaks very clearly to a direct line between cost and speed. If we had done that, executed that faster, we would have had the business. And I think it's just kind of, there's lots of little places on that thousand cuts where, these opportunity cost of not being able to do higher value work, the hidden opportunity cost of your customer experience not being in line with their expectations, and simple things like having notifications or quote templates can speed that up.
Perfect example, and it's one that hits home as a professional management firm like ours as well. We can certainly see the impact of low business development decisions on having someone else steal the market from you. So, full example, I'm sorry to hear that. A really good one about the speed of decisions and to improve into a new market or advancing a new relationship with a customer simply because you don't have all those extra touch points, right?
Yeah, and I would say the one thing that we can do with automation is make your business run faster and smoother. The one thing we can't do is all the parts that you still have to do, make sure you do them too. And I think that's part of where the automation, Microsoft chose the word co-pilot well, I think. It's a partner in crime. It's helping you do all this work, but it is still not able to make all those decisions and do all the work on its own.
Just before we leave the topic of diagnostics, I don't want you to give away your black box, but from working relationship, I understand that you typically operate with a client. You do so with an open book and you engage different groups for their insights. And you said that you, with your experience, often come in with a very intuitive first look at the organization to sort of know where the opportunities are likely to lie. Can you walk through just a typical approach and a generic one about how you would get in, conduct a diagnostic, start to finish?
Yeah, so I think as management consultants, we're often brought to engage with the senior leadership of an organization. I tend to start our kickoff engagement with the senior leadership and the stakeholders to understand the goals, but I actually would prefer to get the boots on the ground opinions kind of first and look at a lot more of the operational resources and what they're doing. I find that finance and HR tend to be two of the biggest departments who are huge proponents of the automation that we do. They have a lot of movement of data that are approval notifications and simple tracking of something in a status. And so those are great little opportunities to kind of move to this process. And then we look at some goals top down as well to understand what kind of drivers they're looking for. And I mean, management will have some priorities. We want to do our best to follow those, but I often find that some of the best opportunities for time savings or improvement come from the operational team instead. They have some of the biggest problems that management might not be aware of the way that they're doing things and how that can be open for improvement. And then just on the note of the metrics there in measuring this, one common example is we build a lot of SharePoint intranets as well as a internal company web portal, and we want to understand how much more we got people using it. So we want to snap usage diagnostics before and after our project so we can understand how much more we've got the usage there. We also do similar thing with our forms. There's 500 paper forms submitted a year. Now there's 1,000 digital ones. It's faster and they're higher quality. We try to measure a lot of our work as well so that we can reflect on it. And then when I say something like, I have a customer who we've unlocked 127% of the money they've given us, we can quantify it very clearly.
Oh, very good. Very good. As you start to get into the how do we actually design the work, excited that you've got a bit of a live demo, as I understand, to share with us today. So maybe before we jump into that, maybe can you sketch out sort of what a typical design of a project would look like and what kinds of tools do you use? Maybe just set the contextual stage for the audience here.
Yeah, that sounds good. I mean, when we're doing some of our workshops, we have a little bit of a script we want to follow so that we're consistent with some of the questions we're asking and the goals that we have. And then we also want to be very collaborative in bringing feedback from the business as well and understanding some of their points as we go through in workshop. We will probably pull up a diagramming tool. We definitely prefer Microsoft Visio or a whiteboarding tool like Miro, but oftentimes if our organizations don't have access to licenses, we might use something simple like draw.io, which is a great freeware open source drawing tool. And we'll drop a couple diagrams. We might do an entity relationship diagram, which will be a list of all the tables, but that's pretty deep into the design and more of a data nerd like myself kind of scenario. We will often draw something up like a swim lane diagram that kind of shows how the data's moving between people and departments, what kind of notifications or decisions might be there. Identifying where a workflow branches and what happens in certain scenarios is really important to do a mapping exercise on all those parts. And I think that's probably one of the hardest pieces is understanding and doing it in a workshop, understanding what some of those edge cases will be. If a document is approved, then what? If it's this type, it goes this way. If it's a different type, it goes to a different person. But diagramming that all out instead of these little hand gestures definitely make it a little bit easier in a workshop, either on a whiteboard or in some shared software like Miro, Microsoft Visio, or Draw.io.
We see this a lot, and I know this is a big barrier for organizations getting started with this kind of work and the philosophy around automation. But you move through the earlier part of our discussion around diagnostics, where you're starting with just a big open question or canvas of where do we begin to getting into the simple diagramming tools. One of the things that I really appreciate about Bauer Automate and the way that you guys do your work on this is you're able to get laser focused on simple design. The diagramming, so you're able to manage the complexity of where do we start, how do we triage, how do we prioritize the work. This is probably a good segue into the actual demonstration if you wanted to show us a little bit more, but I think those that are watching this webinar and video footage, I think what you're going to see as Riley goes full speed through this demonstration is it's just so simple. And you probably think to yourself, how could I do that, or how do we get started on something like that? So that knowledge transfer is also a big part of what Riley and his team do, but just pay attention to how simple this can get to be able to drive towards changes to the bottom line. This is going to be pretty cool.
Thanks, Jeff. So with that being said, I'll pop open my demo here. So this is going to be a pretty quick example just to preface this before we get into it. I'm going to show the creation of a folder workspace where we can have files that get approved. We'll have a little button on demand to send out the approval, and we'll look at some opportunities where we can make this process a little bit better. I am going to go fairly quickly here. Normally when I'm doing a tutorial, I'm a little bit more walking through the steps that I'm doing, but for today's session here, this is really showing the art of the possible, and as someone who does this lots, I'll show you how fast this can be done. All right, so first up here, we're starting on a SharePoint site, and I'm going to go ahead and make myself a document library. Let's think about an HR use case here, and maybe these are policy documents that need to be approved. So I'm going to go ahead and make myself a new document library, and I'm just going to use the blank template and make this my policies. And of course, you're going to follow good habits like writing a nice description on your work. All right. So now I have a folder for some files. Let's go ahead and plop a file in here. I'm just going to make myself a new Word document. We'll call it a policy, and we don't need to put anything in the document. This is about the document lifecycle itself. I'll go and write a document about our webinar here. All right, perfect. So I've got my webinar plan written out by our bot now. We've got our webinar buffer slot document, and we can look at the approval of this. So I'm going to go ahead and add a couple columns on SharePoint. The columns are the data we're using. One thing that's nice about SharePoint is you can treat your files and folders like a spreadsheet, so we can have extra data about our file. And so I'm going to add in some columns here about the approval. So an approval has a person, so who approved it, we'll call it the approver. And then I'm also going to add in the comments from the approval comments as a multi-line of text. And then I'm also going to add in a date for when the approval happened. And finally, I'm going to add in a status choice of the approval. So we'll have approved, rejected, and pending. And I'm just going to adjust the colors here so these are a little bit clearer for the goal. Approved will be green, rejected will be red, and pending can be yellow. Perfect. All right. So now I have a folder workspace. I have a file in here, and this file's got a couple properties on it. Let's go ahead and set up an approval to send based on this. All right, so we'll go to Power Automate, and I'm going to go ahead and make myself a new workflow. And this is going to be a simple flow, so we're going to have this one as an instant flow because I'm going to say press a button and get an approval. Be my employee experience policy approval workflow. So I'll give it a name there, and I'm going to find it on a selected file on SharePoint, and I'll click Create. All right, so now I've got that set up here. We're going to go ahead and pick our SharePoint site. So I'm going to pick my employee experience site with the new policy library that I've made. And when I send the approval, I'm going to have a couple things I want to add to the approval. So I do want to have, when someone sends an approval, I want them to be able to ask who is going to do the approving. And we want to maybe give them a little message too about why they're receiving the approval. So I'm going to add in an email address for the approver. Please enter an email address for the approver. And I'm also going to add in a text field here to input. This will just be custom message or something like that. Any other details to send to the approver. All right, so I've got my inputs in place. Now I'm going to go ahead and get our approval ready to go. So first thing I'm going to do is get some more information about this file. I want to link to it to make that a little bit easier for them to find. So I'm going to get the file properties, and I'll pick my employee experience policy, and I'll get the ID of this item here. And then I'm going to go ahead and we'll start our approval. And I'm going to start and wait for an approval. And this is a built-in thing from Microsoft. So if this is part of the low-code world that we get where a lot of the work has been done for us, this is already a built-in approvals engine. I just need to set up who's getting the approval. So in this scenario here, we have a couple choices. Everyone can approve, or the first person to approve. And then this is just either approve, reject, or custom choices. I'm just going to assume this is one person approval. So I'm going to do the approve or reject with the first person to respond. And for the title, I can get mix some static text and some dynamic text here. So new approval is requested for file, and then I can put the file name in there. So I can get the name of the file. And now who this is going to be assigned to, I'm going to assign this to the email address of the person who's been asked as the approver. For the details, we had that custom message that we asked, so we can send a custom message into the message body. Please approve the file. Here's some extra detail. And then I'm going to go ahead and add in a link to the file as well, and the file name again. So we got a little something to take the person to. And then on here, I can also say who this approval is coming from. And so this can be the person who pressed on the button to send the email. All right, so I've got my file, I got the details so I can get my link, and I'm sending out the approval. Now let's do something once the approval comes back. So I'm going to go ahead and add in a condition, and I'm going to do this based on the outcome of the approval. So if the approval is approved, then we're going to mark the item as approved, and if it fails, then we're going to mark the item as failed. So let's go ahead and update our SharePoint item now. Whoops, I need to update the file properties. It's a file I'm working with. Update file, and then I'll pick my SharePoint site and policy library again. Make sure we get our ID number, and then here we can see all those properties. So we have the document title, who the approver is, the comments, the date, the status. So the approval status is approved. The approval date is when the approval completed. The approver claims is the person who completed the approval. So we'll get the approver's email address. And then I'm also going to get the comments that came out of there. Now I'm not touching the rest of these, so I'm just going to clean them off out of the screen here. So we have our approval, and then we go and update our file based on our responses. Now I'm just going to pull lazy here and copy this from one side to the other, because the only thing we need to change is that the approved is a rejected. And then we also, I need to do something with my loop here, so I'm just going to pull this out of the loop, email again. All right, so we've got our approval and rejection there. And then I guess one more little thing I'm going to do just for the user experience is I'm going to copy this step again, and we're going to update the file as pending while the approval is started, just so that that's a little bit better for the end user. So right before we send our approval, we're going to mark it as pending, send our approval, and then if it's approved, we're going to update the file saying it's approved with the comments and details. Otherwise, we're going to say it's rejected. All right, so that's a basic file approval workflow. I'm going to save this and we can just test it to see what happens. All right, so we've got our workflow here. We've got this enabled. So let's go back to our SharePoint site. I'm just going to refresh the page and we should be able to use this workflow now. So I have my file. I click on the three dots, and in the automate and the workflows, it's going to check for workflows that are available, and it should find our employee experience policy approvals. So now if I go to send this file off, it's going to ask me to set it up for the first time to sign into SharePoint. And then I can pick who the approver is. I'm going to send this to myself. And then I can have a custom message in here. So please review this webinar policy before the session. Now, I can come here and I can watch the workflow run behind the scenes. So I can come here and take a look at what's happening as it goes. So it's gone through, it's done our first few steps here. It's updated the file properties, and now it's started and has waited for the approval. So let's see what's happened. If I refresh this page one more time, our properties have now been set to pending and the approval is running. I've received an email and a Teams notification in favor of not opening my mailbox in the webinar. One more place I can see this is there is actually an approvals section in Power Automate. So I can come here and I can see the approval as well in one more place. So I received an email and a Teams notification and a notification in this approvals section here. And they all look pretty similar, where I can see the approval. There's the link to the item. So I click on this, it'll bring me right to the file so I can see the file that we were drafting. And I can review it, see who it's been sent from, which was Riley, and I'm other Riley. And then I can choose my option here, so I can approve it or reject it, and I can put my comment about how great the plan is. Now, in my history, I'm going to see that approval, and that'll be here forever, so I can see this approval logged here in my history. I can also, on the file, if I refresh it, see now who it's been approved by, what the comments were, the approval date, the status has now been approved. And SharePoint has this nice thing called the version history, where I can see all of those changes as they had happened. So I made the file, we marked it as pending, and then we marked it as approved as it went through the lifecycle. So all of what I've just shown you is built in. And if you have a Microsoft 365 license, even the business basic tier, this is all available to you. And then the world's your oyster from here. We take this up and we make a 5-stage approval. There are different conditions for when that approval goes out. Maybe someone doesn't click a button, it automatically goes out under a certain scenario. Every day you check for files under a certain condition. This just starts to expand and become way more, there's way more you can do with it. Before I pass this back to you there, Jeff, do you have any questions about the demo or what I've just shown?
Just walk through at a higher level what we've seen here. So when we queued up the demo, we talked about simplicity in design.
Yep.
In a few minutes, you've got the ability to think through, design, set up, test, and then ultimately execute a very simple process. Is this scalable?
Yeah, so I mean, we just see this scaling up to multiple departments need a workspace like this. Like I said, with this process, I have made approval flows that have been 20 stages of approvals, where we have had a very long process with internal and external people supporting the life cycle of like a contract, for example. And so we've seen that scale up quite well on longer and larger engagements. One place it doesn't scale well is Power Automate has some limitations, and it's just a matter of working with an experienced partner to work around them. For example, the approval of a regular Power Automate flow can only live for 28 days. But if you design your approvals in a special way, it can live forever, because we can work around that timer. And so there's lots of different things that we can do to kind of enhance that experience. But in a quick 10-minute session, we can put together something like this that can be a module and a pattern you can use across the organization.
I think when you move beyond the tools, though, you've built an organization around the philosophy of automation and the benefits from organizations looking to find these opportunities, right? So whether or not it's a Microsoft platform, concept should be the same. You're trying to reduce process volatility by getting the human out of the equation and creating simple, consistent design that's repeatable, reliable. Is that sort of fair?
Yeah, exactly. And then it's also just a matter of like organizing the information as well. If this approval wasn't here, it's buried in somebody's mailbox. Mm-hmm. And so it's a matter of just bringing those things into a central location. Like this is now there's an approvals database in the Microsoft world here that we have. So now all of these approvals are in a central spot, and any administrator could see all of the approvals that have gone through the system and these records here. So I think it just kind of also reduces some of the disparity and the scatter in an organization, because we're making consistent processes that are using central repositories to track this kind of data.
Okay, brilliant, simple example. I really appreciated the demonstration here. Why don't we step outside of the demo before we open it up for live Q&A with the audience members that want to ask you some questions. I have a couple just related to culture. Culture is a really, really important part of organizational change, business transformation, and getting people to do things differently than they might not have done since the dawn of time, since email was originally formed. And as you say, things get trapped in email for workflow. So you just broadly talk through culture and sort of what you see when you work with clients in this space?
Well, everyone really likes their email, and I think that that's something that I'm finding big resistance on. Is there's a huge attachment to email, and personally I've been finding it's harder and harder to manage a big mailbox, and I definitely prefer to. I've taken a tone now with my team where we don't email each other anymore. There's no point. An email is a business letter to your customers, and a Teams message or some sort of other instant message is a conversation. And I think we've moved a lot of our just general communication there, which I think has been a subtle but significant shift on just like the general tone across the organization. Okay, so we're taking a tone where email is a little bit antiquated, and we have now made a purpose for emails, business letters, we chat in Teams. And we can take that same extension and say, well, if I get a new tax form from the CRA for my staff, why would I ever print it off? I'm just going to, from a top-down perspective, digitize it the first time before anybody sees it, and take that new step where we start trying to be early leaders on the adoption instead of the laggards. McKinsey did a survey last year, and they found that automation leaders were able to cut 22% off of their processes, whereas only about 8% for laggards who were investing in similar process improvements that weren't automated. And so I think it's just looking at, if we have that culture from the top down, then a lot of these problems get simpler to solve, and we don't necessarily feel so overwhelmed by how much work it might be as a culture change if we're trying to push those things the first time. And so if there's a new process, we are taking an automation first perspective on it instead of trying it out. There's a little bit of a growing pain there, and it's a little bit slower to get some of those things to market, but I think it's the similar process of, you want to polish it before you would bring it to market from whatever perspective you're taking. If it's part of the operational service, we just think the supporting paperwork and the rest of that is equally as important to make sure that it's a very scalable, repeatable process.
Mm-hmm. One more question just related to culture then. So you engage with clients and their stakeholders around trying to drive new behavior based on changes to the technology and the automated workflows. If any, are some of the typical resistances that you might encounter with people that would cause them to either resist the changes that you're trying to drive or to not engage with you in the first place?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to speak ill of anybody here who isn't necessarily as strong in tech as I am, but I definitely have found that it's a general fear of the unknown, where it's something new, it's something different, it's a change, period. It doesn't really matter what the change is. And that kind of just goes back to when we do our projects, we try to identify some people who are going to be key champions and key dissenters or resistance, and make sure that they get some extra TLC and good support during the project. So anybody who's going to be those champions, they get a little bit of extra support to be a key stakeholder. They get involved in the project early and they get some extra training. They can be that ear to the ground to help us kind of tame some of the dissenters as well. And I think just looking at simplifying it at a higher level for the organization, we really want to help the get the resistance in favor of these changes as well. And by doing that, like, we want to make sure that we spend some extra time with them. We really try to understand their actual concerns, because many times we find some people are, banging their fists in the air because they don't like the idea of new automation or something that's a change. But it really just a matter of helping them understand how it's actually going to save them some time, and working with those champions who intimately understand the business is really helpful, because they're often a better voice than I am. I'm a new evil, scary consultant who's coming in from the outside and is telling them they got to change all their work. Their peers saying, well, actually, it's saving me a bunch of time. This is better. This is easier. I find is way more successful.
The old peer pressure tactic for organizational change management.
Yep.
Absolutely. It's one of the tried and proven methods for being able to help bring a culture along, is to be able to show some of the quick wins and success stories. And I know you guys work pretty hard at being able to unlock a lot of those early, to be able to show that this isn't quite as scary, or there's not as much unknown or unfamiliar about the process that you're following. So
Exactly.
So I like that. And I think that makes it we talk about friction, frictionless way to be able to engage with an organization that often wrestles with the where do we get started part of the problem. So
I completely agree. But that's okay if they don't know where to get started. We have some simple ideas for some low-hanging fruit. I'm going to once more revisit that time off request suggestion on is a very common process most organizations see. And in at least Alberta, where I live, every employee is legally entitled to some sort of time off. So everybody's going to touch it at one point. And it's a great place where they can start seeing, oh, hey, this is a little bit easier to submit this. And then it starts planting those seeds further through the organization. So I think if I would have any tip for an executive who's trying to figure out, where do we start with the automation, find one of those low-hanging processes that everybody in the organization is impacted by. Because, and it's something low risk, like time off. Like, if someone is away for the day by accident, it's hopefully not mission critical in the same sense that there's an operational problem with how you're delivering your customer service. And so I think it's something that's a nice low risk and simple process that you can try to start with, or something similar. But I think looking at those are a great place to introduce your organization to the concept of automation and how you can really simplify the day-to-day operations of your business.
Excellent. Okay, we have a couple of minutes that we can take some live questions actually from people, and I've got one queued up already to begin with. We don't have enough time to finish the questions, and we'll start with that one. If we don't have enough time to finish, right at the end, we're going to share how do we contact Blue Monarch, how do we contact Bauer Automate for our next conversation, and that's where some of the magic and interesting next steps and discussions could come. So maybe why don't we start with that first one? So your advice for integrating Power Automate with legacy systems?
Yeah, so automation's cool till you can't do it, but I think Power Automate has some interesting ways around working with some of the legacy systems. So Power Automate does have a tool called the Robotic Process Automation Bot, or RPA. And what it essentially is if the task can be done on a computer, we can do it in Power Automate. Most tools have what's called an API, or an application programming interface. Long story short, it's an easy way for us to send instructions between different tools so they can talk to each other. And it's a common language for different applications to speak to each other. So we can tell instructions over to from Power Automate and ask it to go do something on your legacy system. But if your legacy system doesn't have an API, then we would use the Robotic Process Automation bot to actually log on to the computer, and it's a piece of software that runs as if you're a person. So it looks at the screen and it's moving the mouse and keyboard, clicking on the screen as if it's a person, and it goes and does that legacy task directly in the system. Maybe the tool doesn't have APIs, or it's running on an older system like Windows 7 or even Windows XP. And then we would go and install the Robotic Process Automation bot, train it on how to click through where the buttons are in your program to submit a record, load some data, view some data, and then we can take that back into the cloud and do some further steps with it for automations afterwards. So if you have some legacy like expense reporting system, we could still submit an expense through a modern form and put it into your classic database as an example. The RPA bot's not perfect, but there's definitely a lot of cases where if you don't have options to automate, you can probably still do something with RPA.
I might just tuck in a follow-on question to that, Riley. How well, particularly with legacy environments where organizations are moving out of obsolete systems or paper-based environments, even in today's day and age, we still have clients that are doing that. How much do you have to pay attention to information governance and the underlying data architecture before you can get started on applying some of these tools?
I think it's really important. I would say it's not critical in the sense that depending on what's happening downstream to your project, I've seen some lack of foresight not really be a problem in our world, but it is really important to, plan as much as you can ahead of time for this and really understand the data models where most of these projects will fail. So if you thoroughly understand what's happening to the data, where it's coming and going, then you'll be setting yourself up for success by doing that basic planning.
Brilliant. So I think that might be all the time that we've got. So why don't we just move smoothly over to the how do we get in touch with you, and then how do people get in touch with us? I'll finish off with a couple of concluding remarks here. So thanks, Clea. So what we've got on screen here is social media handles and email contact information for Bauer Automate. You can see that on the left-hand side of the screen. We'll make this material available to the audience as well following. So either grab a screenshot, or we can certainly follow up and we'll reach out to people that participated today. Similarly, on the right-hand side, how do we contact Blue Monarch? So simple admin. Please continue to follow both organizations on our Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn accounts. Riley, I want to thank you for giving your time, your skill, your experience, and some of your stories today. This is the first of a really interesting series of conversations around what I think is a trend to stay, is how do we start to drive either low value or high transactional work either out of the organization completely or into a repeated and hidden space to allow the human brain power to be able to get on to bigger and better things. So really, really interesting series that we're queuing up here. It's pretty clear that you're good at what you do. So thank you for attending.
Well, thank you for having me as a part of this. I really appreciate the opportunity, and I've just been impressed with what Blue Monarch's been doing from that planning perspective. So happy to be a supporting part of the automation that we see in businesses.
Excellent. Thanks, Riley. To the audience members that attended today, thank you very much for giving up part of your Friday morning. It's great to have you, and we look forward to a continued conversation with you soon.
Thanks, everyone.